You've probably heard those 5 notes before, and if you were wondering what they're from, you're about to find out. Hi everyone! So for my final project, I decided to do Close Encounters of the Third Kind. 1, because I'd never seen it before, and that's what you wanted us to do. 2, because it was by Steven Spielberg, and I love Steven Spielberg films. And 3, and maybe my most important reason, I knew that the score was by John Williams, and I love John Williams. I've loved John Williams ever since I joined band, which was like in the 5th grade. And I had to see if this score was up to par with those other scores. It was. Was it above E.T. and Star Wars? No, I wouldn't say that. But it was definitely so good. Okay, so Close Encounters of the Third Kind is directed by Steven Spielberg. We all know Steven Spielberg. He has done so many movies. He's done Jaws, E.T., Jurassic Park, Schindler's List, Saving Private Ryan, so many movies. He actually started off doing television films, and his most famous low-budget film was The Sugar Land Express, but his career really took off with Jaws. I mean, Jaws, by the time it came out, it became the highest-grossing film of all time. His next film after Jaws was Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Close Encounters of the Third Kind gave him his first Best Director nomination at the Academy Awards. He has been nominated for 7 Academy Awards for Best Director, winning 2, and 10 of his films have been nominated for Best Picture. The unadjusted gross of all of Spielberg's films exceeds over $10 billion worldwide, which actually makes him the highest grossing film director of all time. That's how good his films are. Close Encounters was actually one of the rare films that Spielberg not only directed but also wrote. His films were seen as an archetype for modern escapism films in Hollywood. Escapism simply refers to the actions people take to relieve their sadness. And Close Encounters is definitely an escapism film, which I'll get into more later. Before I go on talking about other aspects of the film, I have to talk about John Williams. It would be an injustice if I talked about Close Encounters of the Third Kind and did not talk about John Williams. So, John Williams has actually wrote the score for every Steven Spielberg movie except for 3. He also wrote the score for, I don't know if you've heard it, Star Wars, yeah, E.T., Harry Potter, and even the Olympics. John Williams has won 24 Grammy Awards, 7 British Film Academy Awards, 5 Academy Awards, and 4 Golden Globes. With 51 nominations, John Williams is the 2nd most nominated individual ever after Walt Disney. So, if that tells you something about him. When writing the score for Close Encounters, Spielberg knew that he wanted John Williams to think of a theme or some motif that the humans would use to communicate with the aliens. John Williams actually wrote over 300 examples of the iconic 5-tone motif used in Close Encounters. The 5 tones are actually used in the film by scientists to communicate with the visiting spaceship as a mathematical language. Much like his 2-note Jaws theme, the 5-tone motif for Close Encounters has been ingrained in popular culture. Williams was nominated for 2 Academy Awards in 1978, 1 for Star Wars and 1 for Close Encounters of the Third Kind. He ended up winning for Star Wars, though he later won 2 Grammy Awards for Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Speaking of Star Wars, we need to talk about how Star Wars took over the culture in the same year that Close Encounters was released, and how it kind of overshadowed Close Encounters, and people kind of threw Close Encounters under a rug. Close Encounters was nominated for 8 Oscars at the 50th Academy Awards. They were Best Director, Best Supporting Actress, Best Visual Effects, Best Art Direction, Best Original Music Score, Best Film Editing, Best Sound, and Best Cinematography. Out of those 8 categories, Close Encounters only won 1, and it was for Best Cinematography. Star Wars ended up winning 5 of those Academy Awards that Close Encounters was also nominated for. They were Best Visual Effects, Best Sound, Best Art Direction, Best Musical Score, and Best Film Editing. If Star Wars had not come out at the same time as Close Encounters, Close Encounters most likely would have won those Academy Awards that Star Wars ended up winning. Moving on to the development of the film's origins can be traced to director Steven Spielberg's youth, when he and his father watched a meteor shower, actually, in New Jersey. As a teenager, Spielberg completed his full-length science fiction film Fireflight. Many scenes from Fireflight ended up being incorporated in Close Encounters on a shot-for-shot basis. In 1970, Spielberg wrote a short story called Experiences about a lover's lane in a Midwestern United States farming community and the light show a group of teenagers saw in the night sky. In the developmental stages of Close Encounters, it was actually going to be a low-budget documentary film that showcased people who believed in UFOs. As he was working on Close Encounters, Jaws actually came into production and took over, so Close Encounters was kind of shoved away. With the financial and critical success of Jaws, Spielberg earned a vast amount of creative control from Columbia, and they basically told him that he could make whatever film he wanted to. And here's a little fun fact. During production, NASA reportedly sent a 20-page letter to Spielberg telling him that releasing the film was going to be dangerous because of the topic it was discussing and how he was afraid it would make, and how they were afraid it would make the American population scared. So when Spielberg initially thought about filming for this film, he did not want to film on location at all because with Jaws, they had so much trouble shooting on location, but that ended up not working, and so he ended up having to shoot on location for this film. Filming took place in Burbank, California, Devil's Tower National Monument, which is a huge part of this film. Okay, so in the film, Roy, the main character, has a visit from the aliens. He doesn't see the aliens, but the aliens come around him and beam down their light on him. And so he starts having visions, or he feels moved in some way, and he keeps seeing this object, which I'll insert over here. And the object ends up being the Devil's Tower National Monument in Wyoming. And so halfway through the film, or towards halfway through the film, he's like, I have to go see this monument because it's driving him so crazy. So he drives to Devil's Tower, and that's where he finds that the government has been communicating with the aliens. And so, besides the Devil's Tower National Monument, it was actually shot in 2 locations in Alabama, which I thought was pretty cool. I didn't know that. It was shot in some World War II aircraft hangars in Mobile, and then it was shot in a town in Bay Minette. The home where Barry is a little kid in the movie. The home where he's abducted at is actually located outside of Fairhope, Alabama, and then the neighborhood where Roy lives is in Mobile. So upon getting the film pitched and all that stuff, Spielberg estimated that it would cost $2.7 million. No. The film actually ended up costing $19.4 million. And Columbia did not have that much money, so they ended up having to do fundraising to get that money. And the film had lots of issues. It ran over, and actually in 1976 there was a hurricane that brought tropical storms to Alabama, which ended up pushing it back, and a lightning strike actually hit the soundstage where they were filming at, so that put production behind, and it ended up just being a huge mess. So I cannot talk about Close Encounters without talking about the visual effects in the film. The visual effects supervisor in the film was Douglas Trumbull, who actually also worked on 2001: A Space Odyssey and Star Trek. And the aliens in the film, which are very scary and creepy looking, I'll insert a picture, were designed by Carlo Rambaldi, who also designed the aliens for the iconic films Alien and E.T. So you could say he knows his aliens. Trumbull's work on Close Encounters actually led to advances in motion control photography. Since Close Encounters was filmed on 35mm film, the visual effects sequences were shot on 70mm film, which has a greater resolution than 35mm film, obviously. So that when the miniature effects were combined with full-size elements through an optical printer, the effects footage appeared clear and sharp despite having lost some of the visual data through the printing process. And I just have to say, this film is incredible to look at. I was astonished by some of the shots. I'll insert a couple of my favorites. One of my favorite was definitely a shot where Barry has opened the door to his house. The aliens are out in the horizon, and you see a shadow standing in the door, and there's the light from outside. It is incredible. There is another shot where Jillian, who was played by Melinda Dillon, is standing outside, and the house is in the corner, and then you see her. She looks very small. It's very reminiscent of Stanley Kubrick's filming style, and I could definitely tell that Kubrick was probably one of Steven Spielberg's idols that he looked up to, because it was evident in some of the shots. And the horizon, you see the aliens in the horizon, and the shot just looks like it goes on forever. I'll put it up here. It is incredible. Speaking of Melinda Dillon, we need to discuss the actors in the film. So the film stars Richard Dreyfuss, who also stars in Jaws, and in this film his character is Roy Neary. I thought his portrayal of Roy was excellent. Roy kind of has a mental breakdown in the film, and I thought Dreyfuss did an excellent job with the role. He wasn't nominated for anything for it, but I thought he should have, because he captured the feeling of escapism, and that's what the film is really about. He's driven so crazy by having to see the aliens, or having to find out why he's having these visions of the Devil's Tower, that he will do whatever it takes to fulfill his action, to fulfill his needs. It also stars, I'm not going to say this correctly, Francis Truffaut as Claude Lacombe. He's a French government scientist in charge of the UFO-related activities in the United States. I said Melinda Dillon as Jillian, who, she did okay. She screams a lot, and her screaming is kind of over the top, but apparently the Academy liked it because she was nominated for Best Supporting Actress, which I thought was okay. Some more stars were Terry Garr as Roy's wife, and Carrie Goofy as Barry, the kid that gets abducted by the aliens. And this kid is creepy. Like, the way he communicates with the aliens, or the way he talks, something about it. It's like, this film is sci-fi, but it's also horror. Like, the film sometimes is very intense and sometimes scary, and I was surprised to see that. I was not expecting that going into the film, but it was nice to see. Because sometimes sci-fi films, they're not scary, but this one was scary and sci-fi, which I really liked. Okay, so towards the end of the film, Roy and Jillian have discovered where the government is going to communicate with the aliens at and try to get them down to Earth. And Jillian's like, I don't want to go down there, but Roy does. And so, out of nowhere, it was really very unexpected to me, they kiss. And they're not Roy is still, him and his wife, Ronnie, have had troubles in the film already. I'm pretty sure they got divorced. It was very subtle. But the kiss between Roy and Jillian seems so unauthentic and so unnecessary. And I want to know what you think. What did you think about that kiss? Was it necessary to the film? Did it add anything at all? I didn't think it did anything. Another thing I noticed about this film is that it really seems to discuss the topic that the government actually knows so much more than we think they know. Because it seems like in the film, the government has been communicating with these aliens, or at least trying to, for so long, and the general public knows nothing about it. And that's a big fear today. I mean, we have the talk about FBI agents looking at us through our the cameras and our phones and our computers, and the conspiracies about the government knowing much more than us really is brought to the forefront in this film, which I thought was interesting, because it's something that is talked about a lot, but it's it seems more scary or real in this film, which I really enjoyed. This film greatly influenced the sci-fi genre. I mean, before this, really the biggest sci-fi film was 2001: A Space Odyssey, which is so good. But after this, we really started seeing those sci-fi films come into play. Because after this, Star Trek was released, and then all the Star Wars films were released, and sci-fi became, Alien was released, sci-fi became a really big genre. One last thing I want to talk about is the visual effects of the mothership itself. For 1977, it is spectacular. By today's standards, it still holds up. Look at this thing. It's crazy. When I saw it, my jaw, I was like, my jaw literally opened. So I want to give credit to Trumbull for his outstanding work. He probably should have won. I mean, Star Wars... yeah. I'm so glad I chose to watch this film. It was fantastic, and I would highly recommend it to anyone. It's a great film that I think anyone could enjoy, even if you're not a big fan of sci-fi films. And I just want to say that I've had a great semester, and I hope you all have a great summer.